My name is Judith. I'm an artist on the youth board for CleanEarthForKids.org, and I'm asking you to please stop using toxic synthetic pesticides in San Diego County. We must protect the health of the children, families, workers, pollinators, animals, the environment, and our climate. We can be exposed to pesticides directly, such as spray coming into contact with our skin, clothes, and pesticide drift, as well as indirectly, such as runoff. We can face chronic health effects, which include nausea, dizziness, cancers, reproductive harm, birth defects, neurological and developmental toxicity, and even death. In March 2020, we helped the city of Oceanside pass its first IPM, so implementing an IPM that will eliminate toxic synthetic pesticides and fertilizers in San Diego County will tremendously improve the environment and the health of millions of people. Our future depends on it. Thank you.
So hi everyone. We're really grateful to be given the opportunity to talk to you about pesticides. And there are many other people who have been working very hard on trying to prohibit pesticides of concern, especially those pesticides that have been banned in other countries. So for example, Kevin, Judith, Janice, Gabby, Darren M., Hannah, Leanna, and other youth and volunteers who are part of Clean Earth for Kids helped the city of Oceanside to adopt an IPM in the spring of 2020. And personally, working to ban toxic synthetic pesticides is important to me, and to ban them near my high school and in our community. Because before learning about this issue from Clean Earth for Kids, I didn't really know what pesticides were. But last year, I attended a presentation where I learned about the pesticides that were being used near Mission Vista and all of the harmful effects that they have on people's health. And learning about this issue really motivated me to work with Clean Earth for Kids to help stop these toxic pesticides that were being used. So what exactly are pesticides? They're chemicals and other substances that kill unwanted insects, plants, fungi, and animals. There are many different types of pesticides ranging from organic to toxic. Some of the toxic ones would include dinotefuran, cyflothrin, and many others that are banned in various countries around the world and have detrimental impacts on people's health and the environment. It's important that farmers use alternative natural methods instead of toxic synthetic or man-made chemicals to control pests, insects, weeds, and bacteria. And exposure to these pesticides can make you ill, and some products have been linked to cancer and neurological problems in children. Judith, if you could please speak a couple of minutes about why this is important to you personally.
Yes, thank you, Cadence. Okay, so as a graduate of OUSD, stopping toxic pesticides is very important to me, and your actions will help inspire. So it is essential for every student and child to be healthy and safe walking and playing on school grounds. And as someone who has a mom whose mom experiences dizziness very often, pesticides can worsen her health, and therefore many others, like my friend Janice, another fellow youth board member of Clean Earth for Kids, she experiences asthma. So we must stop toxic pesticides because they are harming biodiversity, ecosystems, our food, our water, health, and the life on Earth. Pesticides have greatly decreased the amount of butterflies, fireflies, and many other bugs due to pesticides. We need to protect our pollinators. We need beneficial insects, plants, and non-toxic IPMs instead of continuing chemical-intensive land management practices. We can use like plants, nature, common sense, and practices like permaculture. By doing this, we can save our planet, lives, increase biodiversity, and fix major damage to our soil, pollinators, water, and our air. Cadence mentioned earlier, Oceanside passed an IPM in 2020, and now our parks are free of pesticides, which is amazing news. The thousands of people who live in Oceanside and the children who enjoy playing in playgrounds no longer are negatively affected or impacted by these toxic chemicals, and that's just incredible to imagine. Thank you. Now here is Kevin.
Thank you, Judith. As a nursing student and aspiring health professional and an older brother, this is really important to me. I say no to toxic pesticides because it directly affects my future as well as my family's and, well, the communities. As an older brother, I shudder to think about what toxins my siblings may potentially ingest as they just go on through their daily school life. I am more so worried about my brother because he was diagnosed with asthma and I heard pesticides may exacerbate it. As an aspiring health professional, the increased use of pesticides may cause increased cases where pesticide poisoning is involved. And whenever something has to do with public health, I will be involved. While I would love to treat pesticide poisoning, I would rather avoid something that can be prevented to make my life and other nurses' lives easier and to, well, increase the quality of life around communities. I worked on the VUSD pesticide spreadsheet with everyone, and while I worked on it, I noticed that a majority of the pesticides that the VUSD is using is banned in other countries, notably the UK and the EU. Over in the East, they like to play it safe for the safety of the children. It's known as the precautionary rule. Thanks for listening to me, and I'll hand it over to Jillian.
Thank you so much. Um, as someone with a pre-existing condition, likely due to early exposure to pesticides, the issue of pesticide usage is a concerning one. Pesticides can lead to the development of conditions like cancer and exacerbate pre-existing conditions like asthma, which has already been mentioned several times in this presentation. However, we have seen that it is possible to cut out use of pesticides completely on school campuses. I'll provide a couple of examples, but for more information, please feel free to check out our website under the Team 5 page, where we specialize completely in banning the use of toxic pesticides. One resource that's really important to share is a spreadsheet which shows toxic pesticides being used in school districts. That will be talked about later in depth. I believe Cadence is going to go over it for us. But my first example is the Seattle University. They have a well-rounded IPM, and they are a leading example that shows how schools can safely eliminate pesticides while still keeping pest problems under control. And another great example is the University of California system that have cut out the use of glyphosate on campuses. And there are a few politicians that are making waves when it comes to ending pesticide usage. I'm sure you've heard of the legislation PACPA, or Protect America's Children from Toxic Pesticides Act. Under this legislation, the use of toxic pesticides will be banned completely, among other things like clearing up loopholes that are in current pesticide law, and making sure that it's harder to get a hold of pesticides. This would be a monumental step considering the way pesticides are treated in this country. For example, Kevin already mentioned the EU, but they've banned over 1,000 chemicals, while the US has only federally banned 11. And this is the same way with other countries, and more specifically pesticides, which you just saw as a slide. And with legislation and cooperation from school districts such as Vista Unified School District, there is hope. And with a little more on that is Cadence.
Thank you, Jillian. So more about the precautionary principle that Kevin mentioned earlier. So we're not using it in the US, but it is used in Europe. And essentially it means that if something has the potential for harm and it doesn't have sufficient research or testing, it shouldn't be introduced into the market. And in the US, we do the opposite. We assume that things are safe until they are proven to cause people to get cancer or other serious diseases. Industries making the pesticides fund studies, and these studies are allowed to be used in determining the safety of the product. And here's Abby to talk about why stopping pesticides are important to her.
Thank you so much, Cadence. Hi, my name's Abby. I'm from Massachusetts. So being aware of what pesticides are being used near you and stopping the use of harmful pesticides is so important to me, as it should be kind of to everyone, because this issue would affect so many people. Luckily, I live in an area where many of these harmful pesticides aren't being used, but other people aren't as lucky, and I want to help those. We should protect these people, the environment, and the wildlife near it. As I said, my local school district and many surrounding school districts have no pesticide policies except for an emergency. This is also possible. Some ones in California are the Oak Park School District, which is a few miles north of Malibu, and it has 8 schools with 4,500 students, and it's pesticide free. So is Goleta Union School District, which is a few miles west of Santa Barbara. It has 10 schools with 3,600 students, and it has had a pesticide-free policy since 2006. Pesticides are also only allowed in emergency case, such like my school district did. So it is possible. And here's Anna T.
Thanks, Abby. Hi, I'm Anna T. I am an intern and filmmaker with Clean Earth for Kids. And like we mentioned before, we are shouting out some of these school districts for their pesticide-free policies. There are links to their IPM programs and other examples on our cleanearthforkids.org website under the Team 5 page, Stop Toxic Chemicals and Pesticides. Some other resources that we'd like to share with you include the 2021 National Pesticide Forum that we attended. It is hosted by Beyond Pesticides, and there were many doctors, professors, land care experts, and health professionals that spoke about the dangers of using toxic pesticides. And here are a few of those doctors that we are shouting out. And this is one of the many reasons why this is so important to me, this panel specifically. I'm learning so much about the health risks associated with toxic pesticide use, and it's really important to me to stop using those pesticides, especially when children are involved, because they're uniquely vulnerable. And it's really important to keep students, faculty, and staff all safe from these pesticides. So, and one of the speakers that I'd like to talk about is board member Chip Osborne. He's president of the Osborne Organics, and he shared with us how to maintain a pesticide-free park. He works mainly in the East Coast, but he has worked all over the country. So he's a great resource to look to for those pesticide-free practices. And he actually worked with the Irvine School District, who established a committee to approve pesticide use before it's ever sprayed. So that is one example how they are leading the way for organic turf and playing fields. And no synthetic pesticides are involved with Osborne Organics, and they put the health and safety of children first. So part of their process involves prioritizing the health of the soil over directly feeding the plant, which is not a priority in the industry. They just like to advertise the products as itself. But with this process, you actually don't need any product input. The healthy bio life is essential to this process. And the natural products actually encourage fertility in the soil and produces a healthy lawn. So they use preventative steps against pests in place of the synthetic products. And some of the steps for this process for the organic turf include soil testing. They test the sand, silt, and clay percentage, as well as the soil chemistry for macro and micronutrients and the pH of the soil, and as well as the biological basis. And they make suggestions based on those test results. And they also use natural fertilizer to feed the microbes. So instead of just spraying the fields with the pesticide, they use the fertilizer that encourages the healthy soil. And this is actually the same cost as conventional practices. And eventually you only have to feed the microbes, and the cost goes way, way down because you're using less water. The low organic matter means you're watering more to retain the moisture, but the cost goes way down when you have to water less and you don't have to use the fertilizer or the pesticides. So this is just one example about how maintaining a pesticide-free and healthy park is actually not as expensive as some may think. And we got a lot of this information from one clip of Chip Osborne talking about the process, creating a healthy and non-toxic field in Irvine, California.
So here are a couple of facts about pesticides. 20% of them that are used in the US are in California, but California farms are only 2 to 3% of US farms. So this is a map showing the different amounts of pesticides used within each area. And in the right corner of the map is a legend that indicates how much pesticides are being used. The colors that are more blue or purple and dark gray have the highest percentage of pesticides. And this is a zoomed in image of the previous map that was on the screen. And as you can see, unfortunately, Mission Vista is in the area with the greatest amount of pesticides used. And the areas labeled county are where the tomato farms are located. They're in very close proximity to the neighborhoods in that area and Mission Vista High School. There are even houses located right along the border of these farms where these pesticides are being used. And it doesn't have to be this way. There are organic farms not using harmful pesticides, and there are farms that use permaculture and techniques to help the soil, prevent pests, and grow food how it was meant to be grown. Commercial farms planting only one crop at a time in a very large area and using large tractors to cover areas quickly are creating more work because the soil needs to be healthy in order to grow healthy plants that are more pest resistant. And there's more information about pesticides and alternatives to them on our website and George Corman's video on our YouTube channel. And here's Abby to talk more about tracking California.
Hi, thank you again, Cadence. Yes, so we use a few different tracking tools here in California. The first one is EnviroScreen, which is a mapping tool from the California Office of Environmental Health Hazard Assessment. As Cadence said, that's just the one that she just uses. So that map, it really maps the pollution burden in communities and toxins like pesticides, and we will drop the link to that in the chat, as well as the link to trackingcalifornia.org, which is the other tracking tool that we use. So this can be used to map out things like air pollution, lead poisoning, agricultural pesticide use, and water quality. So we will show you images taken from trackingcalifornia.org, which indicates how many pesticides have been used in certain areas of California. So like Mission Vista is located in the dark red area. And how Tracking California works is that the darker red areas, just like Cadence, the darker blue areas on EnviroScreen, the dark red areas are where there are the most highest amount of pesticides. So greater than 8,141 pounds of pesticides, I believe, in that certain area. So trackingcalifornia.org and EnviroScreen 4.0, yes, it's a new version, that Cadence also just shared with us, are both excellent tools that you can use to track these pesticides and see if they're located, near your home or school or community. Obviously, we are using them to track near Mission Vista, but they can be used for many other different areas if you like. And back to you, Cadence.
Thank you, Abby. So there are the top 10 pesticides used in the square that we chose. The number one pesticide used in this square is chlorpyrifos, which is a toxic air contaminant. So I'm going to present some important information about a farm using toxic pesticides right near Mission Vista High School and some of the pesticides that are possibly used by the USD. So this is a spreadsheet created by Clean Earth for Kids that depicts all of the pesticides that have been used in 2019. So hundreds of thousands of pounds have been sprayed on West Coast tomato growers' produce. And there are different types like fungicides, insecticides, nematicides, herbicides, and more. And here you can see the active ingredient in the pesticide and how many countries the pesticide is banned. And this is a continuation of the list of pesticides used by West Coast tomato growers. And additionally, on the rightmost column, there are many health risks associated with exposure to these pesticides, such as endocrine disruption, kidney and liver effects, and birth and developmental effects. And these are just a few of the health effects pesticides have on people's health. And in a later slide, we will be going over more of these dangerous health effects in detail. Fipronil and some of the health effects would include cancer, endocrine disruption, reproductive effects, neurotoxicity, kidney and liver damage, and some other ones that you can see on the screen. And instead, some alternatives to fipronil would be boric acid, silica gels, diatomaceous earth, and some essential oils. Be imidacloprid, and some of the health effects include cancer, endocrine disruption, reproductive effects, neurotoxicity, and kidney liver damage, and then some other ones like being toxic to birds, toxic to fish, and also toxic to bees. And again, some of the alternatives to imidacloprid would be diatomaceous earth, neem oil, and some homemade insecticidal soaps. And then there's one for oil spray, and you can see the ingredients listed on screen. So pesticides are a racial, social, economic, educational, public health, climate, and environmental issue. It's a racial issue because a majority of farm workers and people applying pesticides are people of color. It's a social issue because people of lower income are more highly exposed to pesticides, whether they live in urban or rural areas. And for an economic issue, people with greater access to money have the luxury of time to be able to advocate for their health. And for people who have lower income, if they say something to their landlord about pesticides, they might be booted out. So they just subject themselves to being sprayed with pesticides. And it's an educational issue because people with higher education have the skills and the vocabulary to talk to people at the city, and they can work for change. And that type of thing takes confidence and experience. And it's a public health issue because there are so many health effects associated with pesticide exposure, like developmental and neurological toxicity. And finally, it's a climate and environmental issue because pesticides negatively impact the environment since they do contribute to global warming and environmental pollution. So this is an image of pesticides being sprayed onto the tomato farms near Mission Vista. And here's another image of pesticides being sprayed by a helicopter. It really shows how close some homes are to the use of pesticides. So one of the problems with pesticide usage is that there are some industry-funded tests, and there's a veritable lack of testing on pesticides because these industry-funded tests are biased and unreliable. They come from wealthy and powerful companies like Monsanto, Dow, and DuPont. They hire lawyers, scientists, and doctors to work for them in order to show that these pesticides are safe or at least not as damaging to our health as they are in reality. And to go more in depth to the health risks associated with synthetic pesticides, you can see that they cause skin, eye, and lung irritation, some hormone disruption, brain and nervous system toxicity, cancer, blood disorders, nerve disorders, birth defects, or toxicity to a fetus, and some reproduction effects. So our number one priority is really the health and safety of young children, infants, expectant mothers, and along with everyone in the community. It's really our number one priority to protect them and to protect their health and their future. So please help us do everything we can in order to protect these people, the animals, and the environment. Thankfully, there was a buffer zone order put in place to put some space between people and pesticides, but this was only during COVID because students were home from school. But what about infants and children under 5 who may be at home during the day with their parents and grandparents or a child care worker? Governor Newsom made an order on May 7th about the use of pesticides near homes and schools during the COVID-19 situation. It was to strictly enforce all applicable pesticide health protections around homes and schools during the COVID-19 emergency. Pesticide applications are prohibited when there is a reasonable possibility of contamination of people not involved in the pesticide application process. And there is another regulation that has been in place since January 1st of 2018 that the minimum distance between pesticide application and the school site must be 1/4 of a mile for higher drift applications such as aircraft.
Thank you, Kate. So the California Healthy Schools Act was passed in 2000 and expanded upon in 2015. It gives parents and staff the right to know about what pesticides are being used in public schools and child care centers. School districts and child care centers are required to establish an IPM plan and report pesticide use annually to the California Department of Pesticide Regulation, or DPR, who is in charge of running the Healthy Schools Act. They must also post warning signs where pesticides are used at least 24 hours before and 72 hours afterward of use.
Thank you, Jillian. So what is an IPM? It's an integrated pest management program that's effective and in its an environmentally sensitive approach to pest management that relies on a combination of common sense practices. In IPM, there are alternative and safer ways that a company could eliminate pests that don't harm the living beings in the environment. And we'll be talking more, or actually, as we mentioned before, about some cities and school districts that do not use any chemical pesticides. We'll be talking about Oceanside and Malibu, and as before, we've mentioned Goleta and Oak Park. And we have more examples and ideas, and we'll be talking more about IPMs that we can help to pass. So for prevention and cultural controls, prevention controls would include removing sources of food, water, and shelter. Cultural controls include things like watering and fertilizing properly and using pest-resistant plants. Some biological controls include things like using ladybugs, bats, goats to control pests. Some mechanical or physical controls include weeding, sweeping webs, mulching, and physical barriers like escutcheons, grates, fences, and door sweeps. There are also some non-toxic substances like vinegar, steam, essential oils, and here are some of the pesticide alternatives. So as you can see, for fleas and ticks, it would be rosemary. Another one would be marigold to repel mosquitoes, aphids. Another one would be basil to, again, repel mosquitoes as well as houseflies. And then there's also a DIY weed spray that you can make with 1 cup of white vinegar, 2 tablespoons of Epsom salt, and 2 teaspoons of dish soap. So the city of Malibu passed an earth-friendly IPM in 2013. The city doesn't use synthetic pesticides or fertilizer on any of their parks, building, or lands. The city council recently banned all synthetic pesticides at limits. And the city of Oceanside also passed an IPM, which was great, but it does have a couple of issues. It allows synthetic pesticides, allows EPA rated 1 and 2 level toxic pesticides being used. It only requires maintenance supervisor approval for use of dangerous pesticides with no training requirement for human health effects. And it doesn't specify buffer zones, and it also doesn't use enough signage or info on the website. And although there are some issues, we're still really grateful for the work that was done by Kevin, Judith, Janice, Gabby, Darren, Hannah, Leanna, and all of the youth and volunteers who are a part of this at Clean Earth for Kids. They worked really hard to pass this IPM, and we, again, want to acknowledge that they did a really fantastic job. So to go more into the EPA toxic ratings, there's toxic category 1, being highly toxic or severely irritating. Toxic category 2, moderately toxic or moderately irritating. And category 3 being slightly toxic, and toxicity category 4 being basically non-toxic or not an irritant, and that doesn't have any labels required. So there was an IPM that was created by Clean Earth for Kids. It's called the Step Up to Protect Children's Health. And some of the highlights, is that it doesn't have any synthetic pesticides, no EPA 1, 2, or 3 level toxic pesticides. It requires department director approval for use of chemical pesticides, and it requires training in human health effects of pesticides. And it specifies buffer zones, and it requires signage and all information on city website. So change happens through people actively working for it. Please help us to make a positive impact on people's lives. And we can create lasting change by making new policies that will protect people today and future generations. Okay, thank you. We have some more in-depth presentations that can be found on our YouTube channel and information and resources on our cleanearthforkids.org website.